Hello YouTube, it is the boy, the one who reviews movies too quickly and too often. B3, back with another fantastic movie reaction review. As you know, we have been going through the original Universal Horror, Universal Monsters, Invisible Man films. One of the few we haven't gone all the way through. And today we are on Invisible Agent from 1942. This one actually is in the main continuity. Invisible Woman, wasn't in the main continuity. And I think, and part of my evidence for that is that it and The Invisible Man Returns were released, around the same year. I think The Invisible Woman was just capitalizing on The Invisible Man's success. I don't think it was part of the timeline. But this one is. The main character is the grandson of the original Invisible Man and the only person with access to the formula. So, The Invisible Agent actually isn't a sci-fi horror film. It's a sci-fi war film. I thought this would be another one outside of continuity, but it's not. It's a different, genre, at least by half, because all the others are sci-fi, but this one, instead of being horror, is a war espionage film. But it actually fit the Invisible Man pretty well. The Invisible Man becoming a spy is a very obvious thing, right? But it's got 6.1 out of 10 on IMDb, 67% on Rotten Tomatoes, I'm stupid today. 92% of Google users liked the film. An allied spy made invisible by chemistry outwits Axis agents with his blonde braided lover. Came out July 31st, 1942. So it is kind of a propaganda film a little bit, which is fine, because fuck Nazis, right? Directed by Edwin L. Martin. Box office, $1.042 million US dollars. It, as I said, is part of the Universal Horror series, and the budget was actually around 32. It was like $300,000, something like that. Just a few of the cast members. John Hall, who plays Frank Raymond. Frank Raymond isn't his real name. He changed it so that people wouldn't know he was the grandson of the Invisible Man and come to steal the formula. Ilona Mancy, who plays Maria Sorensen, who's kind of she's a spy as well. She spies for the British. You got Peter Lorre, pretty well-known actor. I think he's quite talented. He plays Baron Ikito, and I want to talk a lot about that. Cedric Hardwicke as Conrad Stauffer, J. Edward Bromberg as Carl Heiser, Albert Basserman as Arnold Schmidt, and K.A. Luke as the Surgeon. So it starts with the grandson of the Invisible Man being attacked by Nazis and one Japanese officer in the States, I believe. Or maybe it was in England, actually. I think it was in England. But it felt like the States. Because he has an American accent. But I'm pretty sure he's British, but he has an American accent. So, whatever. So, the Nazis come for it. He doesn't give it to him. He escapes. He's kind of a badass, despite just being a normal dude, to be completely honest. And then the United States government is like, the men who attacked you are Nazis, of course. And we would actually like your formula as well, because it could help us create invisible men to really help our government. And this is before we're even in the war, timeline-wise, in this movie. And the grandson of the Invisible Man, he's like, I will never give you the formula, because it will do more harm than good in your hands. There's no... And then the government was like, it could help us prevent a big disaster. And he was like, there's no disaster big enough that would make me give you this formula. And then it cuts to a newspaper headline saying Pearl Harbor happened, which was supposed to be really dramatic, but it felt like it was comedic. It was such a weird comedic style cut, but it was obviously supposed to be serious. Because this is very recently after Pearl Harbor. They're not making Pearl Harbor jokes in this movie, for sure. And I was like, what was up with that cut? So then Pearl Harbor happens, and he comes in and he's like, I'll give you an invisible soldier. One. But it has to be me. It can't be anybody else. You're not allowed to use the formula on anyone else. And then they're like, we have like a bunch of soldiers that are more qualified than you. You're a bartender. Like, you're gonna be terrible at this. And he kind of was. But then he's like, nope, it has to be me. And I thought he was going to say it has to be me because if the serum stays in anyone long enough, they'll go mad and we can't risk a trained U.S. soldier going mad. That would have made so much sense, right? That's not what it was. He just didn't want anyone else to have to do it? I don't know. It's kind of weird, because in this film, they get rid of the serum makes you insane after a while thing. They get rid of that completely, and instead of the serum making you go insane, it makes you narcoleptic. Like, he just falls asleep randomly sometimes. And it's like, really? What? What are you talking about? That was kind of a stupid change. But I guess but since it's, once again, it's a propaganda film. Like 100% this is a propaganda war effort film. Which I'm fine with in the case of fucking up Nazis. But they were like, we can't have this hero fighting nobly in the war go insane. We can't have that because he's supposed to be the perfect, pure, good allied soldier who's British but has an American accent. So I guess they were like, he can't go insane, but there has to be some kind of side effect. I know, we'll have him be narcoleptic. I hope I'm using the word narcoleptic correctly. But yeah, so they do all that, and the Nazis kind of figure out there's an invisible man at large very quickly, because he's an idiot! The dude, like, as soon... He arrives at his contact, who sends him to another contact, and then he immediately gets drunk and plays pranks on a high-ranking Nazi. Like, high-ranking enough to have personal secret meetings with Hitler. And he's pulling pranks on this Nazi. And the Nazi storms out and he places the dude's contact, who is the blonde woman that he falls in love with. They fall in love with each other immediately upon first time talking to each other. It's really stupid. There's no build-up. It's actually terrible. It's actually pretty bad writing as far as the romance goes. But she gets mad at him after he pranks the Nazi so much that the Nazi runs away. And she's like, what are you doing? A whole year's worth of espionage just went down the drain. The dude was about to tell me about the secret attack on America, which you were supposed to listen in on and report to the British. And you screwed up. You pulled pranks on him. And he was like, sorry, I'm drunk. And I was like, what? This is why they should have sent a soldier. So then that soldier the Nazi tells other Nazis what happened, and then those Nazis are immediately like, oh shit, that's the Invisible Man, because the first two cases of Invisible Men are actually, like, well-known knowledge at this point. Like, within the story of the first film, the Invisible Man became a widely accepted fact, and they caught on to him real quick in the second film because the ability to become invisible was a well-known fact. So in this film, of course, the Nazis are the same way. They're like, oh, well, that's the Invisible Man. He gave them the formula after Pearl Harbor. Like, they figured it out so easily because he was being so stupid. But in this original series, Universal felt like that every Invisible Man movie had to have scenes of the Invisible Man just pulling pranks. And I think that was because of James Whale, because James Whale directed the first one. James Whale loves putting, like, a bunch of comedy in his movies, which is totally fine. It was very charming. It worked out in Bride of Frankenstein. It worked out in The Invisible Man. But then The Invisible Man was a huge hit, and every single director after that was like, okay, we have to have a scene where he pranks, because that's from the first one. People liked that. It's kind of like how in the sequel Star Wars trilogy and in, like, all these new prequel films that they're making, like Rogue One and Solo, they're not really making those anymore because they sucked. But They're like, oh, we have to have all of these beats that are exactly the same as the original trilogy. We can't have an original thought. I feel like lots of the Invisible Man sequels kind of have that fault as well. So yeah, not super great. But, yeah, so he does that. Eventually he does get captured, but by the Japanese who are with the Germans, but operating illegally in Germany. Like, the German guy loses the book with all the names of all the German spies that are in America and the names of all the Japanese spies that are in America. And the kind of Japanese I guess he's a baron, but I guess he's like also kind of the Japanese ambassador to Germany. Like, knows they've lost it and he's pissed, so he's taking stuff into his own hands, captures the Invisible Man himself with a really cool trap, because the Invisible Man's always naked. Right? So, he can be susceptible to a lot of things. So they found out where his contact was, because the dude was also dumb enough to call his other contact from there, and they were already suspicious of her because he made them suspicious of her. They knew the Invisible Man was there because she did that, and he was also talking loudly in her place, and Nazis were running around like, we heard a man's voice in here. He was a shit spy. He was invisible, and he was still a shit spy. Oh my god. It's so stupid. And all this stuff happens, and like, he's telling, like, at first he trusts this woman completely, and then later he just completely flips his views on her for no reason. Like, because the Germans are onto him, and he thinks it's because she turned him in, but it's actually just because the dumbass revealed himself, and he's like, you betrayed me. And she's like, no, I didn't. Trust me, I'm way deeper in this than you. And she tries to explain things to him, but he won't listen to her. Then the Japanese catch both of them, and they catch him with this awesome net with huge fish hooks on it. So they drop the net on him because they can see him holding a hammer, so they know where he is. They drop the fish net full of hooks on him, and they all dig into him, and he can't get out, and it's awesome. It's actually a really cool trap for the Invisible Man, and I thought that was awesome. The Japanese take him away, and here's where it gets racist. So I thought the Baron was like Austrian or something, right? Because it was obvious he wasn't Japanese because... it was obvious he wasn't German because the Germans kept talking down to him. But I didn't... But you see, the thing is, I didn't... Okay, sorry, hold on. I didn't know he was Japanese because they just kept calling him the Baron, and then it turned out he had a Japanese name, and I was like, oh, so this guy's kind of like the guy in charge of the Japanese soldiers at the embassy here. And I was like, okay, well, he's white, which is a little odd, but at the same time, it's like, he's white, there's no yellow face, and he's not doing a silly accent. So I was like, okay, that's cool. So he's just a white Japanese guy. It's kind of weird that they have a white actor playing, like, the guy in charge of the Japanese people, but I guess that's because they were just racist and didn't want to have an actual Japanese actor because they were all in camps at the time. But they have a couple Japanese, like, smaller actors in the scene. But then when he wakes up, he's like, all you JAPS look the same to me, but I recognize your voice. And I'm like, look the same? This dude's a different race! You've seen him before! Like, that's so right. They once that scene gets there, they start using the J word, and they start getting real racist. Like, were the Japanese bad? Like, was the government bad then? Yeah, but the racism, a little uncalled for. So, the Germans show up, they fight the Japanese. it's kind of got a pretty satisfying end because they get on a German plane and they fly away, and she's like, I'll use the radio and warn the British that we're coming so they won't shoot us down since we're in a Nazi plane. And he's like, no, I don't trust you still. Even though you just saw her get, like, captured because she, like, confessed to being a spy to you. It was wild, dude. And he's like, I still don't trust you. And then she's like, okay, take the wheel so I can use the radio now that we're over Britain. And he's fallen asleep because the serum makes him narcoleptic. And they get, like, shot down, and it's actually pretty cool. And that's basically how the film ends, with just them kissing, because that's how all these films end. But there is one really cool scene I want to talk about. So the main German guy and the main Japanese guy, like, get in a scuffle. And the Japanese guy, this is big spoiler, stabs him and kills him. And one of the other German guys just watches because he knows if that guy dies, he gets his position. And the Japanese guy kills the German guy with a knife, rips the swastika armband off him and wipes the blood with it, and off the knife with it. And I was like, okay, that's a pretty cool move. But then he puts himself in, like, traditional Japanese garb in front of this shrine with incense and stuff, and I'm like, what's he doing? And then he just commits seppuku for seemingly no reason. Like, are you dishonored? Because you just killed your foe. Like, the guy who lost the names and locations of all your spies to the Allies, like, it seems like you just did a service to your country. Why are you committing seppuku? I think it's just because that's kind of a stereotype. I don't know. It was weird. That kind of ruined the scene. But the killing him and then wiping the blood off with his Nazi sash to, like, disgrace it, that was really cool. But yeah, so my final thoughts on The Invisible Agent. Really, really cool idea. It's kind of weird to have, like, a couple films in this series that are just different genres, especially one that's, like, not in continuity. It's kind of weird. But The Invisible Agent is cool. They at least tried to make this one connect, and it did. But the two horror ones are much better. The first two Invisible Man films are much better. I feel like The Invisible Woman's just outdated. I feel like we've moved past that film. And then The Invisible Agent, yeah, it's got some heavy sexism. Like, this German woman, it kind of, like, at the beginning of the film, it kind of makes it seem like she's only spying against her people because, like, the Nazis don't treat women well. And that's, like, the only reason she's against the Nazis. And it's like, that's a little weird, right? Like, you're cool with all the other stuff. But then it turns out that she might be British because she talks in a German accent the whole time. And then she sees him on his bed in Britain, and this British guy introduces her as one of their best spies. And then she talks in a different accent, but then she goes back to the German accent. I was really confused. This movie could have definitely been better, but it's still a pretty fun watch, you know? And since Nazism is prevalent again, especially in my own country, which I hate, it's becoming relevant yet again. So that is it. Thank you all very much for your support. Remember to rate, comment, subscribe. Check out all the cool things in the description below. Facebook, Twitter, etc. Next time, hopefully, we will be doing The Invisible Man's Revenge. But until then, I actually have to go finish some laundry. So I'll see you all next time.